you are an artist originally, but you are doing so many things that it's
Yeah. Well,
hard.
okay.
But it's always been this kind of a social.
Yeah. Well, the social side of things has been part of my working life since 1999, so over 25 years. And I was trained as visual artist in graphic arts, printmaking, fine art printmaking in Glasgow School of Art. And what I liked about that was that it was a workshop practice. So you were always anyway making your art in the company of others. You weren't necessarily doing your artwork with others, but you were in the company of others, right? So it was always socialized.
Yeah, no, but not everybody has like a printing press. So
No, absolutely, absolutely. But it's not a studio practice in the same as some others, right, in fine art. And then the other side of things is that I became interested in club culture, so I was also interested in making visuals for clubs when I still lived in Glasgow. And then I went to Finland in the end for 5 months in 1998. And I was very lucky. I was a guest of a printmaking centre in Jyväskylä, Grafika Keskus there in Jyväskylä. And they had a little residency room, and I got a scholarship, luckily, from the UK, and I spent time there. And I was invited to make an exhibition, right? Because I was doing something a bit weird at the time, which was making prints and scanning them into the computer and doing digital imaging, and then trying to make
revolutionary
and trying to make animations from them, right?
Yeah.
So, but they were animations for clubs, like, so imagine little video loops, right?
Yeah.
So it was quite unusual, to be fair, and so the curator of the centre said, "Hey, Andrew, maybe you would like to actually stay longer and make an exhibition." And it was actually my first and actually only solo exhibition, right? In 1998, December 1998. And at the time, actually, I got to know some local musicians, and they played live at the opening. And they had this weird electroacoustic music, like nice ambient stuff, but it worked really well with video loops, right? And animation loops. And it sort of gave that musical environment to the visual artwork. And I vowed afterwards that I'm going to always try to do things with others in the future. So already like 99, when I get back to Scotland, I was like, right, I don't want to do solo work. I want to do social work. And I moved back to my home area. I didn't have an apartment in Glasgow. I'd given it up to go to Finland. So I moved back to my home area, to where my parents were living. And I spent maybe a year between Glasgow and this area called Clipmanager in central Scotland. And the bigger town in that area called Alloa, it's very a small community. It's like the whole municipality has about 50,000 people then in the late 90s. And it's also an area which has quite a lot of deprivation. It's very post-industrial. It was famous in the past for coal mining and textile mills and brewery industry, and there's still glassworks, to be fair, but almost all the industries that used to exist there are now over. And it's quite a small, rural, post-industrial, small-town area. So it meant that actually the social services were quite strong, because that was actually, they were the main employer. The local council and their social services was the main employer left. And they had a daycare centre for adults with learning disabilities or communication issues, or what you would now call neuroatypicality or something like this. And I started to volunteer there. And they had a very curious multi-sensory room. And I got my first experience of doing so-called community arts. And because of that, I got invited by the local council's art development officer, the one who commissions artists to work with people, to do a work with teenagers who had social behavioural issues. There was a special support school. And so I did digital imaging with teenagers. And then later I did a workshop with adults with mental health issues. Okay, I was actually struggling myself at that time, so it was very complicated type of work to do, with no budget, with no software necessarily, with freeware as it was then in the late 90s. So like I got very quickly into experience of doing digital imaging with people as community arts. And so when I eventually came to Finland, after a master degree in computer graphics, 3D graphics. I had a bit of experience of doing virtual environments with teenagers as a community arts workshop, or digital imaging with teenagers in northeast England. So when I came to Finland in 2002, end of 2002, I had a profile which was community arts plus digital arts, which was quite unusual, and maybe some of the experience I had at the time was quite unusual. And there wasn't many people doing that type of thing, for sure. But when I came to the Media Lab in Helsinki, then it was University Art and Design. I had this background of doing sort of social work. So experimenting with new technologies, mobile technologies for me. At that point, it meant that it was quite easy to do things with people, and actually experimenting with new technologies and new media interfaces and making workshops was actually what I knew. And it was very easy to slip into the idea of social engaged arts, or not just community arts where you get commissioned often to do that type of work, but you decide that your practice as an artist is working with other people and maybe exploring new media or new network cultures or online publishing, which was what I was doing in the mid-2000s. It became a practice which blurred already into social engaged arts and what some people, of course, nowadays just call social practice.
Yeah, I think nowadays it's a bit more common, but I don't know, actually. I mean, I have the feeling that before it was not something many people would go into.
Well, I mean, certainly there was there has been since the 90s, the relational aesthetics in contemporary art practice, quite famously known, where artists would make social events as occasions to do something together, to be together, to experience something together, and that was the artwork. But that was done within the framework of contemporary arts, and maybe even gallery art institutions. And what I was doing when I came to Helsinki was get involved with media art festivals like Pixel Lake Festival, where the experimenting with new technologies and the making of workshops and inviting people to take part in messing around with some new or emerging practices was something which was quite natural to me because of that community arts background. And then because it wasn't necessarily within contemporary art practice, it was within media arts and network culture and festival format, it meant that actually we were quite free to do whatever. And it was quite easy to do that. And it was only really when I met particularly Danish artists who had a social engaged art practice in mid-2000s that I started to think, oh yeah, there is something in contemporary arts which is this as well. And there's this history of this also, which is not just community arts. It's like the artists deciding for themselves to work with people. And that was where it sort of merged together a bit. And I gained a new discourse, I suppose. I also learned about social design, or social engaged design, and social design, where you think about how designing for interfaces that don't exist yet, or promoting new interfaces. So it was actually this hybrid mix that I got involved in. And it just happened that by like 2006, for example, 7, I totally abandoned mediated practice for a while at least, and started to do things in public space or work with grassroots communities, and still maybe sometimes in festival formats, but not necessarily so. And that's where things started to become a little bit more about a social activism or a cultural activism that wasn't necessarily taking place in a festival and definitely wasn't taking place in galleries. So I've been used to being outside of gallery spaces for most of the 25 years since the turn of 2000s, right? And that's been quite natural for me. And it's meant I've had to do social arts, let's say, in other spaces, in other ways.
Do you ever miss doing some art just for yourself?
Well, of course I have some things just for myself. Creative writing is just for myself. Most of the writing I've done also as an academic or researcher has mostly been myself. The things that I throw around to the internet in social media is myself mostly. So there's enough in what I do that satisfies my interests. Do I want to go back to doing artwork on my own? I don't care too much. I mean, I can do it, of course, if it's necessary, if it serves a function, if it suits the purpose or the cause, but it's not necessary. I actually quite like working with people.